Hi, my name is Nurete Brener, and my presentation today is on Adam ve'Adama, Judaism and the environment, or Adam, humans, and our relationship to Adama, the earth. Welcome, everyone. So if there's anything that this climate change crisis and the disasters that seem to go along with it, including the current pandemic, if there's anything they're warning us, it's that we need to shift from the story of separation to a new and also ancient story of interbeing. The story of separation is individualism above all else, we're all on our own, and that it's human nature to be selfish and self-interested. The new story of interbeing really talks about how when one person hurts, we all hurt. When one person heals, we all heal. We are connected to nature too in the same way. So the new story of interbeing is one in which we understand that we are all interconnected. What happens on one side of the world impacts everyone else. Remarkably enough, our Torah contains within it both these stories and gives us a roadmap for the evolution of consciousness leading from one to the other. This is not a neat linear process, though. It might look like it from the way I'm going to present it, but please know that it's much messier than the way it sounds from the way I'm going to be presenting it. It's really a jumble, a weave, an intermingling. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to present it here step by step, from separation to interbeing. So, 4 passages from the Torah, each represent a different mode of consciousness and a different kind of relationship with the earth, with Adama. The first represents the apex of separation. The second mitigates and limits the story of separation without negating it completely. The third tells us that the world is a web of interconnected relationships. The fourth proclaims the universe an integrated whole, which brings us once more into right relationship with our earth. Perhaps it is our role as humans at this time to take all 4 of these modes of consciousness and interweave them into a tapestry that covers all. So the first one is the story of separation, dominating nature. And most of you will be familiar with this one from Bereshit, chapter 1, verse 28 of Genesis. Vayevarech otam Elohim vayomar lahem פרו ורבו ומלאו את הארץ, כבשוה וירדו בדגת הים ובעוף השמיים, בכל חיה הרומסת על הארץ. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. Fill the earth and master it. It is remarkable how much of the history of our Western civilization can be linked to these words, even if those who consider themselves the masters are not overtly conscious or perhaps even willing to admit that they are guided by the fill the earth and master it injunction. This verse has been interpreted to view domination as the natural right of men who fit the supposed image of the presumed hero Adam, and I'm using men here on purpose. The hero, I'm using masculine language here on purpose, and you'll understand why. This is the domination stage of consciousness. This stage asserts that we humans are the most intelligent, the most competitive species, and therefore we have a right to continue to exploit nature for our benefit. Mastery and domination lead to all manner of hierarchies, right? Men ruling over women, white people enslaving people of color, humans subjugating animals, the idea of master races, supremacies, and if you take this even a step further, you get into a cosmology that allows for things like concentration camps, the Middle Passage, crusades, genocides. This is the domination stage of consciousness. And we humans have created whole industries based on and justified by this mode of consciousness. Fossil fuel extraction is one of them. The meat packing factories, which treat animals, of course, as units of consumption. Cosmetics industry, experiments on animals. fashion industry, which leaches chemicals and dyes into the earth, pesticides. All these are justified by the careless understanding that we humans are the masters of nature. And the terminology that's being used today is called the Anthropocene, or the age in which human activity has impacted the very climate and conditions of the earth, leading us directly into an evolutionary dead end, revealing itself really as a suicidal enterprise. So I'm going to ask you to think about it. If we were all together in the same room, which I'm sorry we're not, I would say to you at this point, I would pause and ask you, and if you're watching this at home, I am going to ask you to pause and say, in what way does the domination stage impact or pervade your life? What do you see that is domination stage in your own lives? But the domination stage is not the final say that our Torah has on our relationship between Adam and Adamah, or humans and the earth. The biblical texts about, in just one chapter later, and several verses later, in Bereshit 2, the Torah makes a sharp 90-degree turn and takes a different tack. So there's already a shift in consciousness in the very first book of the Torah between chapter 1 of Genesis and chapter 2. And here's the second one. In Genesis 2, verse 15, we encounter this shift. Vayikach Adonai Elohim et ha'adam, vayincheu began Eden le'ovda u'le'shomra. The Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. And this is probably familiar to most of you also. So Adam was tasked with two jobs, right? To work and protect the garden. And there are many different translations of the Hebrew. The Hebrew is le'ovda u'le'shomra. Some have translated it as tend or till, dress it, keep it, work it, care for it, watch over it. There are many translations, but all of them have a connotation of caring for the earth. Each has its own nuance, but this is certainly a very different consciousness from what we saw earlier in the domination stage in Genesis 1. So rather than dominate nature, we are now commanded to become caretakers or stewards of nature, and I'm calling this the stewardship consciousness. So in this next stage on humanity's evolution, stewardship has displaced dominion. Some Torah scholars have seen working and tending of the earth as complementary yet contradictory jobs. The more we work the earth, and this is by Evan Eisenberg, who has written in Torah of the Earth. The more we work the earth, by which I mean the whole spectrum of human meddling, from tilling the grain to setting grass fires to splitting the atom, the more we are obliged to protect it. If we fail to do either, we fail to be fully human. These tasks were set us not just for our brief tenure in Eden, but for the whole of our stay on earth. Indeed, by setting us the first task, God sets us up already for expulsion from the Garden of Eden. For when we work the earth, we work her hard. And the place we work ceases to be Eden. We move outward in waves of work, waves of improvement, or today we call it progress, but also waves of devastation, of fruitfulness, and waste. By setting us the second task, God tried to set a limit to the height and reach of these waves. And that is from Evan Eisenberg, Torah of the Earth. The most obvious example of stewardship, the one most familiar to all of us, is, of course, agriculture. So agriculture is stewardship, but still contains a consciousness of separation from nature, which is why I say the stewardship consciousness is not completely separate from the age of separation or that consciousness of separation that I talked about earlier. But it is a more benign separation than that of industrialized civilization. Animal husbandry, for example, is about keeping animals and tending to them, but also keeping them in cages. Agriculture contains within it caring for the earth, but also we have big agri today, which uses pesticides which seep into the soil. By settling down in cities with agriculture and farming, we are separated from nature, but we are conscious of needing to care for nature. Perhaps big agriculture has mixed the dominion and the stewardship stages of consciousness? Like I said, it's not a clean, linear progression here. Perhaps there's a spectrum, and big agriculture falls somewhere in the middle. There are many ways to parse this out. So the development of agriculture marked a kind of contraction from our relation to the living earth. We walled ourselves off from the wild with agriculture and with what we call civilization. We domesticated animals and plants, but all for anthropocentric, meaning human-centric purposes. We achieved progress in farming and animal husbandry, in city building and architecture, in bureaucratic organization, in military laboring, scribal institutions. But our direct attunement to the animate earth contracted or receded. And this quote I have here is from Indigenous Sustainable Wisdom, a wonderful book worth reading. So here's something to think about at this point. And again, this is where I pause for a minute. In what ways do you care for and tend and steward the earth? Think about this in your own lives. But again, not the final say that the Torah has in this, in our relationship between Adam and Adamah. So here's the next one that I bring in, and this one is from Job, or Eov, right? I'll do this in English first and then in Hebrew. But ask now the beasts, and they shall teach you, and the fowls of the air, and they shall teach you. Or speak to the earth, and it shall teach you. And the fishes of the sea shall declare unto you, who knoweth not among all these that the hand of the Lord has wrought this? Here's the Hebrew. ואולם שאלנה בהמות, ותורך, ועוף השמיים ויגד לך, או שיח לארץ ותורך, ויספרו לך דגי הים. מי לא ידע בכל אלה, כי יד אדוני עשתה זאת. So this quote, the next quote I have is from the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which I believe is a must-read. So if you're inclined, please put it on your reading list. She writes, in the Western tradition, there is a recognized hierarchy of beings, with, of course, humans being on top and plants at the bottom. That's what I've been talking about, the consciousness of separation or the consciousness of dominion. But in native ways of knowing or indigenous ways of knowing, human people are referred to as the younger brother of creation. She writes, we say that humans have the least experience with how to live, and thus the most to learn. We must look to our teachers among the other species for guidance. Their wisdom is apparent in the way they live. They teach us by example. They've been on Earth far longer than we have, and have had time to figure things out. So notice how Robin Wall Kimmerer, when she talks about indigenous wisdom, is in a lot of ways reflecting that passage that I brought from Job, from Eov. She goes on to say that learning the grammar of animacy could well be a restraint on our mindless exploitation of land, reminding us of the capacity of others as our teachers, as holders of knowledge and as guides. Imagine walking through a richly inhabited world of birch people, bear people, rock people, beings we think of and therefore speak of as persons worthy of our respect, of inclusion in a peopled world. And today there's a movement afoot to recognize rivers as having rights and mountains as having rights. And this is all part of that type of consciousness. Imagine the access we would have to different perspectives, the things we might see through our other eyes, the wisdom that surrounds us. We are in deep and intimate relationship with Adamah, the earth, and the beings of the earth. We can learn from them. They are our teachers. So in this third stage of consciousness, I would say we are currently at a watershed moment in human history, a kind of phase transition that we are facing, and this pandemic is bringing it very, very close to home. In order to reach this next phase, there are things we need to let go of. A surrender of ego, perhaps, a surrender of grandeur, a surrender of seeing ourselves, us humans, as top of that pyramid. That kind of arrogance, perhaps, we need to let go of. Maybe each of us personally has to surrender something. Here's my question to you. What are you being called upon to surrender? Is it approval? Is it a public image? How do we lean into service to Adama? And here's my pause. Think about, in what way do you learn from the earth, from the creatures on the planet, from the plants, and any other living beings we share this earth with? And finally, the fourth stage of consciousness that I promised you in the beginning. This is from Kohelet, Kohelet 1, 4-7. Dor holech v'dor ba, va'aretz le'olam omedet. וזרח השמש ובא השמש, ואל מקומו שואף זורח הוא שם. הולך אל דרום וסובב אל צפון. סובב סובב הולך הרוח, ועל סביבותיו שב הרוח. כל הנחלים הולכים אל הים, והים איננו מלא. אל מקום שהנחלים הולכים שם, הם שבים ללכת. I'll do that in English too. This is Ecclesiastes 1, 4-7. One generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. The sun rises, and the sun sets, and glides back to where it rises, southward blowing, turning northward. Ever turning blows the wind. On its rounds the wind returns. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. So in this fourth stage of consciousness, as you can see, the universe is an integrated whole. And if you notice, there's almost no separation between humans and the rest of the world. In fact, we hardly see mention humans in this entire passage that I just brought from Kohelet. Perhaps the only hint of human beings here is in that first line, which says, one generation goes and another comes. But the wholeness is such that we cannot separate the humans coming and going, from the rest of creation. I believe that this particular passage in the Torah is in coherence with a famous quote which has been attributed to Chief Seattle. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. This is from a book by Sherry Mitchell called Sacred Instructions. Again, another one that I would urge you to include in your reading lists. She writes, "We cannot see ourselves as having dominion over the land, the water, the animals. We can't even see ourselves as being stewards of the earth." Notice as she's talking about the same thing I'm talking about. "We are only keepers of a way of life that is in harmony with the earth. Every day we must acknowledge that we are part of one living system, a unified whole. This understanding is very different from the belief that humans are chosen above all others. That view creates countless distortions that not only elevate man inappropriately, but also diminish the rest of creation. The indigenous worldview recognizes the land as kin in relationship, right? As part of the lineage of life that we are all connected to. Thus, we have an obligation to care for the land in the same way that we care for our human relatives. It's our responsibility to speak on behalf of the natural world, not because we are superior, but because we speak the language that other humans understand. I believe that what Sherry Mitchell in Sacred Instructions is writing is very, very much in tune with the passage I brought from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes. So my question to you at this point would be, again, a pause. How are you indigenous? In what way are you indigenous? If indigenous can be defined as earth-connected or in tune with the rhythms of the earth or close to your own local ecology, how do you express that view? How do you express your own indigeneity? How do we Jews do that? These are big questions. These are questions I would love to have a larger conversation about. So if you are interested in that larger conversation or curious to learn more about Judaism as an indigenous tradition, and part of my thesis here, my own assertion here that I'm stating is that we Jews are an indigenous tradition. We are part of the wisdom traditions of the world. We have remained earth-connected throughout our history. So if you're interested in a further discussion, please get in touch with me. I'm my nonprofit, Lake Erie Institute, presents courses and programs about Indigenous Judaism. We have one upcoming starting in August called Indigenous Judaism, Readings, Reflections, Rituals with the Rhythm of the Jewish New Year, of the Jewish Year. Please get in touch with me if you are interested. And thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it. Toda rabah.